I learned about Emily's 35th birthday party, not from my son, nor from my daughter-in-law, but from my wife's nephew during a casual phone call. His voice was bright, as if he were sharing a grand event for the whole family. I heard that David and Emily are preparing a big party at the Fairmont Hotel. You must be a VIP guest, right? I froze for a moment. Fairmont is one of the most luxurious hotels in Boston, with a ballroom bathed in crystal light, ceilings 15 feet high, and the faint hum of a piano drifting in the air. And yes, I knew they were hosting it there. Not only did I know, I was the one who booked it. 3 months earlier, David had come to my house one late afternoon. He sat down on the wooden chair out on the porch, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand, and told me he wanted to throw an especially memorable birthday party for Emily. He said he had tried contacting a few places, but they were all fully booked. I smiled, because that is the kind of story people outside the industry often hear. In the restaurant and hotel world, things are rarely truly booked if you know the right person to call. I picked up the phone and called an old friend who is now the events director at the Fairmont. An hour later, the finest ballroom was secured for the date David wanted, complete with premium catering. I not only signed the contract, but also immediately transferred the deposit, something I considered perfectly normal, because family helps each other. I did not think any further about it. In my mind, I would be sitting at the main table that evening, watching Emily laugh, hearing David speak, raising my glass to toast them as I always had for every special family occasion. Yet here I was now, hearing my nephew's question, and realizing I had never received an invitation. Not trusting the unease settling in my chest, I decided to call David that very afternoon. "Dad, about the party at the Fairmont, I know you have a busy schedule, so..." David began circling around when I asked him directly. I cut in, keeping my voice steady. "Busy or not is my business. I am asking if there is an invitation or not." On the other end of the line, there was a faint sigh, as if trying to smooth over the tension. "Guest list is limited, Dad. We want to keep it warm and intimate. Just a few truly close people." I heard my own voice answer with an, "Oh, I see that even I did not believe," sounded casual. The call ended quickly. I sat still for a long while on the chair, watching the late daylight spill across the lake in front of my house. For the first time in my life, I could see clearly a faint yet razor-sharp line between family and outsider. I had lost my wife 12 years ago and poured all my care into David and into Emily from the day she came into our home. I had thought I was still part of their important moments. But that limited guest list, it was not just an excuse, it was a gentle way of saying, "You are no longer inside the circle." The feeling was not like a burst of rage. It was like a stone dropping to the bottom of a well. No echo, just ripples spreading quietly outward. I remembered all the times I had been there for them, from when David was struggling to start his business, when Emily was just stepping into the legal field. The evenings I set aside my own work to watch the restaurant so they could meet clients. The times I pulled out my checkbook and handed David money to tide him over without asking for a single signature. And most recently, putting down the deposit for an entire ballroom for a party to which I was not invited. I told no one about it. I did not call back to ask why. But from the moment I hung up, something in me shifted. A thin fog that had long obscured the truth began to clear. I realized I had not just been excluded from a party. Perhaps I had been excluded from my own son's family long ago. Only today had they shown it to me plainly. I poured myself another cup of tea, leaned against the door frame, letting the distant streetlights cast my shadow. Inside me, a slow-burning feeling began to take shape. It was not loud, it was not violent, but it was certain. I was born and raised in a small seaside town in Massachusetts. At 20, while my friends were still figuring out what jobs to take, I was already standing behind the counter of a rented kitchen, one hand on a knife, the other holding a dream. From a family diner with only enough seats for 10, I expanded to 3, then 6, then 12 restaurants, all carrying my mark. Polished oak tables, warm golden lights, a menu that changed with the seasons, yet always kept the traditional New England flavors. I met Linda, my wife, when the third restaurant opened. She was a night shift server with bright eyes and a smile that could turn a damp, rainy day pleasant. We married 2 years later, and a year after that, David was born. From the day my son came into the world, everything I did revolved around the word family. I worked 6 days a week, often coming home after he was already asleep, but I never missed any important occasion: birthdays, graduations, or school performances. Linda passed away from cancer when David was just past 20. I had to be both father and mother while keeping our restaurant chain from collapsing. There were nights I sat alone in the empty kitchen, listening to the clock tick, wondering if I could both raise my son and preserve the legacy Linda and I had built. But David grew up, went to college to study economics, and began to form ambitions of his own. When he said he wanted to start a business, I did not ask many questions. I withdrew my personal savings, handed him a check, and told him, "You do not need to pay me back. Just remember, this is blood and sweat." I called a few old partners, people who trusted me enough not to need contracts, and introduced David. They helped him secure a good location and a few favorable supply agreements. Emily appeared during that time, a quick-witted young woman with a smooth way of speaking, and she seemed to truly love David. I was happy to see my son happy. On their wedding day, I gave them a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Boston, one of my rental properties, so they could have less pressure. In the early years, David and Emily still treated me as a pillar. I was often invited to Sunday meals or called in to give advice when they planned to expand the company. But I noticed that as their business began to flourish, the invitations became less frequent. In their place came phrases like, "Dad, just relax." "Dad, let us handle it." Or, "This is complicated, you do not need to worry." At first, I thought they wanted me to enjoy my later years. But over time, I felt myself being pushed out of the circle where decisions were made. I remember once David's company held a signing ceremony with a major corporation, the very partner I had introduced to him. I only learned about it from the news, seeing photos of David and Emily in the center, flanked by executives, smiling brightly. No invitation, no word of thanks. When I casually asked, "I was free that day, why didn't you call me?" David only smiled. "Just an internal event, Dad, very small." Another time at Christmas, I went to their house with a large gift, a set of vintage wine Emily once said she loved. The door opened, and I stepped into a living room full of people, their friends and colleagues. Emily looked briefly surprised, then said, "Oh, you came. We are just having a small gathering." David hurried over, led me into the kitchen, and whispered, "Just grab something to eat here. Everyone out there is from the company. You do not know them." I sat alone in the kitchen for nearly 2 hours, then made an excuse to leave early. Incidents like that were not many, but they were enough to make me feel I was fading from the family picture I had once placed myself at the center of. Emily still spoke politely, but her eyes would quickly shift to someone else when I spoke. David was busy, and each meeting was only a few polite questions before he was pulled back into his phone. I told myself maybe the younger generation is different, busier, needing their own space. But deep down, I knew a gap was growing, and I did not know, or perhaps did not want, to find a way to fill it. When I helped them book the ballroom at the Fairmont, I thought it would be a way to reconnect, an invisible but valuable gift, showing that I was still here, still ready to stand behind them, even if it was just for a party. But the limited guest list phone call erased that illusion completely. And when I strung together all the times I had been neatly edged out of important occasions, the picture became clearer than ever. I had been on the sidelines for a long time, only no one had said it out loud until now. A week after the limited guest list phone call, David asked me to meet for coffee at a small shop near his office. I arrived 10 minutes early, sat at a table by the window, and ordered a black coffee without sugar, the same way I had for years. The door opened and David walked in, wearing a white shirt buttoned to the collar, a silver gray tie, and his phone still glued to his hand. He had barely sat down before saying, "Sorry, Dad, I only have about 20 minutes. We exchanged a few casual words about his work, a few questions about my health. Then David set down his latte, leaned back, and looked at me with a mix of seriousness and forced gentleness. "Dad, you should start resting more these days. Let us handle family matters. The younger generation does things differently now." I took a sip of coffee, pausing for a few seconds to be sure I had heard correctly. I am still healthy, and I have never wanted to interfere unless you asked. David gave a polite smile. I know. But there are some things that would be easier if you were not there. That sentence sounded light, but I heard the weight beneath it. I nodded, not to agree, but because I wanted to hear how far he intended to go in pushing me out. He said nothing more, only checked his watch and excused himself for an urgent meeting. 2 days later, I stopped by David's apartment to drop off some bank papers connected to an investment I had once guaranteed for them. The door was slightly ajar. I knocked softly and stepped inside. From the living room, I heard Emily out on the balcony, her voice low but every word distinct. No, he doesn't need to be there. It will honestly be more comfortable if it's just friends and real family. I did not catch the rest, drowned out by traffic noise. But it was enough to know exactly who he was. I stood still for a few seconds, then walked into the kitchen and placed the envelope on the table. Emily came in moments later, surprised to see me. "Oh, when did you get here?" she asked, her voice pitched slightly higher than usual. "Just now, I left the papers on the table. You can give them to David later," I said. No one mentioned the balcony conversation, but it hung in the air for the rest of my time there. That afternoon at home, I opened my email to respond to a message from an old acquaintance in the hotel industry. Out of habit, I skimmed through the promotional folder, and there it was. An email from Fairmont's sales department. The subject line read, "Guest list and seating chart confirmation. May 12th event." I opened it, intending only to check that everything was set as requested. The first page was the contract, my name, my contact details, and my electronic signature at the bottom. Nothing unusual, until I scrolled down to the guest list. I read from top to bottom, looking instinctively for Richard Hale. It was not there. I read again, slower, line by line. Still not there. The sender had also attached a seating chart with each position clearly labeled. At the center table, where by family custom I should have been seated beside my son and daughter-in-law, sat a couple I did not know. The other tables were filled entirely with Emily's friends, David's colleagues, and Emily's relatives from her mother's side. On my side of the family, only David, his sister, and a distant aunt. I leaned back in my chair, the screen glowing in front of me, staring straight at proof of a truth I had been avoiding. They had not forgotten me. They had deliberately excluded me, yet still used my name and my reputation to secure the booking, sign the contract, and most of all, draw on my old company's account to pay the deposit. The pieces began to fit together. The vague comment at the cafe, Emily's phone call on the balcony, now the guest list with my name absent. The picture was clear. They wanted to use my connections and my money to create a perfect event, but they did not want me present. The reason could be as simple as image, not fitting the atmosphere, or more likely to create an invisible line, keeping me out while still taking what I could provide. I closed the email and looked out the window. Outside, the spring lake rippled under sunlight, scattered like gold across its surface. I thought of Linda. Awesome. If she were still alive, would it be like this? Probably not. Linda had a way of making people remember that family was not just blood, but presence. Now there was only me and a decision to make. I am not a rash man. A lifetime in the restaurant business taught me that reacting too quickly can burn both the dish and the opportunity. But I am not the kind to swallow a sugar-coated insult either. And the way they handled this, quietly, skillfully, as if I would never find out, made me decide that if I acted, it would be calculated, step by step. That night, I reopened the contract and read each clause carefully. The payment section stated, "The booking party retains the right to change or cancel the contract up to 24 hours before the event." The contracting party, Richard Hale, representing Hale Dining Group, ceased operations in 2021, but legal accounts still valid. I smiled faintly, not in amusement, but with the satisfaction of someone who had just found an unlocked door in what seemed like a sealed room. They wanted a lavish party without me. Fine. But they had forgotten that all of it rested on a foundation I had built, and I knew how to dismantle it with just a few phone calls. When I turned out the light and went to bed, my mind was as still as the lake outside. There was no anger, only certainty. The certainty of someone who has lived long enough to know that sometimes silence is the first step toward a strike powerful enough that it never needs to be shouted. 2 days before the party, I received a call from Frank Delaney, an old friend who had once managed events in Boston and now oversaw a chain of luxury hotels, including the Fairmont. We had known each other for more than 30 years, closed more than a few deals together, and Frank was the kind of man who always knew when to say what he knew. "Richard," Frank began, "I just reviewed the seating chart Emily sent this morning. Your name is not on it." I gave a dry smile. Not surprising, but to be honest, I was still hoping for a spot at the corner of the table. Frank sighed. "This is not about a corner seat. It was crossed out entirely. I even heard her tell the service team, 'Do not let him stay past the main course.' When I heard that, I thought it best you knew." That sentence closed the last door of doubt. This was no oversight. This was a planned script, a stage where my role had been struck from the cast list long ago. If I showed up, perhaps they would put me somewhere out of the way, only to gently make me feel like the extra no one needed. I thanked Frank, hung up, and stood on my porch looking out at the lake rippling in the April wind. No anger, only clarity. A person can only be humiliated once if they never saw it coming. But when they do see it, they have the right to choose how they step onto the stage. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into my old company's contract archives. The legal account for Hale Dining Group was still active, even though I had retired. More importantly, every contract for the Fairmont party, from the ballroom to the menu to the band, was signed under my name or the company's legal entity. I began reviewing them. Fairmont contract. The deposit was large enough to retain the right to alter or cancel up to 24 hours before the event. The terms were clear. The contract holder may adjust any booked service, including menu, seating chart, or the entire event. The jazz band contract, signed directly with me, 50% paid in advance by company check. The florist, booked through my account, fully paid but with a clause for a refund if canceled 12 hours in advance. I noted every term into a leather notebook. Decades in the business had taught me that an event does not exist just because of an idea. It exists because of the strings held by contracts. And if you hold those strings, you control the stage. I said nothing to David or Emily. There was no need. I still heard David's voice on a voicemail, offering that if I wanted to stop by for a bit, I was welcome. A line delivered like someone reading from a script they did not believe. I let the phone sit silent and kept checking my supplier list. That night, I sent a few messages to the leads for each service, not to cancel, but to confirm contact details, arrival times, and payment conditions. Everyone responded quickly. They knew me, and they knew I always paid on time. While checking through, I reopened the seating chart Frank had sent. At the center table, to Emily's left sat David, to her right her parents, followed by her closest colleagues. Around them, I recognized a few faces that had once dined in my home. Once called me Uncle Richard with a warm smile. Now I had vanished from that map entirely. Looking at that chart, I realized I could, if I wished, walk into that party and sit wherever I chose. A word with the management would be enough. But that would be playing by their rules. I wanted a different game, one where I controlled the moves and the timing. The next morning, I went to the bank and met directly with the manager handling the company account. I requested the latest statements, confirming that the deposits for the Fairmont and all other vendors had come from my account. The clerk handed me the papers, her eyes briefly curious but silent. I signed, placed them in my briefcase, and felt as though I was stitching the first threads of a net they did not know was closing around them. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table, brewed a pot of black tea, and laid the contracts out in neat stacks. Hotel, band, flowers, menu, photography, all of it within reach. I marked each with a red note flag at the cancellation clause in the direct contact. When finished, I closed the folder, leaned back, and for the first time in weeks felt lighter. Not because I had won, not yet, but because I was no longer on the defensive. That evening, an email from Emily arrived, addressed to the whole family. Please arrive 15 minutes early so we can get the group photos done on time. Dress code, black tie. We look forward to seeing everyone. I read the words, we look forward to seeing everyone, twice and smiled. I knew that in their minds, everyone did not include me. But I would be there, not for the photographs, but to do what they would never predict. When I turned off the light in my study, I stepped onto the porch and looked at the moonlit lake. In that moment, I saw Linda there, smiling, nodding gently. In marriage, she taught me patience. In business, I learned that the most decisive blow is the one they never see until it has already landed. And I was ready. The next morning, I began my work as if preparing an event for a VIP client, not to destroy it. Years of running restaurants and events had taught me exactly what to do first: control the entire supply chain. I called Marco, the Fairmont's event manager, a man I had worked with on several important functions back in the day. His voice lit up when he recognized me. "Richard, I assume you're calling to finalize a few details for the birthday party." "That's right, Marco. I just want to confirm one thing. The contract and all payments for the 12th are still under my name, correct?" "Absolutely. I have the signed contract right here. Nothing has changed." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Good. Keep it that way. And if I need to make last-minute adjustments, I can come directly to you." "Of course. You're the booking party. All changes are yours to make." That answer felt like placing another chess piece exactly where I wanted it. Next, I called Samuel, the leader of the jazz band booked for the evening. He was the son of a musician who had played in one of my first restaurants, so respect came naturally to him. "Samuel, confirm for me the start time and payment terms. We've received 50% from you already, and the rest will be paid immediately after the performance. If canceled within 24 hours, you get a full refund." "Perfect. Keep the date. If anything changes, I'll let you know directly." I noted it carefully in my book. Band, cancel within 24 hours, 100% refund. The florist, the decor supplier, the photography service, all held contracts with me and confirmed that a single phone call would halt everything. I paid special attention to the Fairmont kitchen. The custom menu for Emily featured premium seafood and vintage wine. The head chef, an Italian I had met at a culinary conference 15 years ago, was clear. "Richard, as long as you cancel before service begins, the special ingredient costs won't be charged. We'll refund the deposit." I smiled, sensing the pieces locking into place, not to build an event, but to be ready to take it apart. That afternoon, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new folder labeled May 12th Action Plan. Inside, I drafted cancellation emails for every vendor, each with the relevant contract attached, the applicable clauses highlighted, and my electronic signature ready. The wording was short and polite. "Due to a change of plans, please cancel services and process the refund as per contract terms. Thank you for your cooperation." Alongside the emails, I prepared printed cancellation letters in case hand delivery was needed. All were clipped neatly into a leather folder inside my briefcase. I also saved all key contacts on my phone for quick access. One call or message, and the domino chain would start falling. The plan was simple. I would show up at the party, enough to confirm my presence. Upon seeing there was no place for me at the table, I would say one line, only one, then leave. From somewhere nearby, I would trigger the cancellations. Experience told me it would take 20 to 30 minutes for guests to realize what was happening, and by then, the party would unravel right in front of everyone. The hardest part wasn't the technical preparation. The hardest part was keeping my expression neutral so David and Emily wouldn't suspect that I already knew and was laying out a plan. 2 days before the event, I happened to see them at an extended family gathering. Emily smiled brightly, asked about my health, and David told a few work stories as if nothing had happened. I nodded, responded politely, even asked Emily about the flowers she'd chosen for the party. "White orchids. You'll love them," she said. Words that sounded like a subtle invitation, but were only sugarcoating a bitter pill. I didn't react. People who believe they're directing the story tend to let their guard down. I needed them unguarded. The night before the party, I sat in my armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, reviewing the entire plan one more time. There were no gaps. Everyone involved knew I was the contract holder. All cancellation emails were written, needing only a click to send. Deposits would return to the company account before the night was over. I thought of Linda. If she were alive, she might have advised a different path, a private dinner, an honest conversation. But Linda was also the one who taught me that respect is not something you ask for. It's something you maintain through action. And sometimes that action must be remembered for a lifetime. When the clock struck 11, I switched off the lights, leaving the black folder, the party's kill switch, on my desk. Tomorrow they would have the night they had planned, just not the way they had imagined. And I, the man they had pushed out of his own family's Oceana time, would be the one to decide when that night would end. That day, I woke earlier than usual. The late spring light in Boston had a clarity to it, as if it could wash the dust from the corners of the mind. I opened the wardrobe and took out the navy suit tailored back when I still ran the restaurant chain, a white shirt pressed flat, a silver silk tie, shoes polished until they mirrored the ceiling above. Not to impress, but so that when I walked in, no one could say I looked like a man who had lost his way. At exactly 7 p.m., I arrived at the Fairmont lobby. The chandelier light from the high ceiling spilled over the marble floor. The reception staff bowed as if I were a VIP guest. I stepped into the ballroom, and there it was. The long, white-clothed table, white orchids at the center, just as Emily had once mentioned, the chairs arranged in a neat circle. I scanned for my name. It was not there, no card that read Richard Hale, no spare seat waiting. David stood beside Emily, both dressed as if they had stepped out of a fashion spread. They chatted with guests, laughing as though I were a stranger who had wandered in by accident. I walked close enough for them to hear, and said low but clear, "Looks like I am not family." Emily blinked once but said nothing. David gave a thin smile, ready to speak, but I had already turned and walked out of the ballroom. No one stopped me. Outside the door, I pulled out my phone, opened the May 12 action plan folder. My finger tapped send on the first email to Marco, the hotel's event manager. The message held only 8 words: activate full service cancellation immediately. The rest followed in sequence. To the band, the florist, the decor company, the photography service. I was as precise as if I were running the event, except this time I was shutting it down. In less than 5 minutes, I saw through the glass that the jazz band was packing up their instruments. A chef walked briskly into the lobby, spoke to the manager, then returned. Food trays began rolling back toward the kitchen instead of heading to the tables. Marco entered the ballroom, leaned toward David, and I imagined the familiar line, "I'm sorry, sir, we'll need an alternate payment to continue." David's face paled. Emily turned, scanning the room as if to spot me. They knew I was nearby. I stood in a hallway linking the lobby to the kitchen, close enough to see without being seen. Murmurs began to spread across the room. A few guests rose, stepping away from their seats, whispering. I saw Emily's mother, Mrs. Simmons, lean to her friend with a puzzled look. David came out quickly, phone to his ear. My phone rang. His call. I picked up, waiting for the urgent voice. "Dad, what are you doing?" "I'm just doing what someone, not family, should do, removing my name from everything involved." "Are you kidding me? People are watching. This is my wife's birthday party. And it's the party you used my money and reputation to host, yet didn't want me in. Now it's all yours, along with the unpaid bill." Silence for a moment, then his voice dropped. "Dad, we can talk later. Just let the evening go on." No, the evening I was excluded from has already ended. I hung up. Looking back, I saw Marco speaking to a group of servers, his hands signaling them to clear half-served plates. The stage where the band had been was bare now, the microphones set aside. The flowers still sat on the tables, but I knew within hours they too would be returned to the shop. Some guests began leaving, coats in hand. Curious eyes and low whispers drifted toward the main table where David and Emily sat frozen. A lifetime in business had taught me that in such rooms, bad news traveled faster than anything, and a party ending abruptly was the kind of story people love to retell. I walked slowly out through the grand lobby, past the bar where a few guests were ordering their own drinks. A middle-aged man, one of David's old associates, asked quietly, "Richard, what happened?" I smiled. Some stories don't need to be told, only witnessed. I left the hotel and stood under the streetlight. My watch read 8:15. The party was meant to run until midnight, but I knew it wouldn't last past 9. David and Emily's image, at least in the eyes of those there, had just cracked deep. I felt no glee, only relief. Relief that I had spoken in action what they had denied me in words. I was not an outsider until they made me one. And once I was, I would never again be a prop in their perfect family picture. Rumors began that very night, slipping across the half-finished banquet tables, then spilling into the hotel corridors. The next morning, Frank Delaney called me, his voice both surprised and lowered, as if afraid someone might overhear. "Richard, what did you do that half the event planning circle already knows about it? People are saying the birthday party at the Fairmont was stopped halfway because the bill could not be paid." I took a sip of tea and answered evenly, "I don't know how they are telling it, but I know exactly what happened, and it has nothing to do with me anymore." In Boston, news like that travels faster than fire meeting wind. The guests repeated it to their colleagues, the colleagues told their friends, and within just a few days, the story of David and Emily, luxury party, unpaid bill, had become coffee table gossip. In business circles, a stain about payment carries more weight than a rumor about personal life. 3 days later, I received a call from a sound equipment supplier who had worked with David's company. "We just got an order from David's company, but sorry, after what we heard at the Fairmont, my boss insists on full payment up front." I only said one word: "Sure." This was not something I needed to push. It would roll forward on its own like snow down a slope. A week passed and 2 more suppliers contacted me, confirming they would require David to pay in advance for any project. The reasons sounded neutral at first. New policy, ensuring cash flow. But I knew the root was the night of May 12th. The story of a party cut short had already shaken trust in David and Emily's ability to pay. Inside the family, the air was tighter than a stretched string. David called constantly during the first week, but I never picked up. Every time the phone buzzed, I let it go silent, then forwarded it to my lawyer. The one time I replied, it was with a single line. All communication through Mr. Harris. Emily chose email. She began with blame. "You made us lose face in front of our friends and business partners. That is unacceptable." But the more I read, the more I saw her slip. In one line, Emily wrote, "We used your name to sign the loan contracts because the bank trusted your reputation more. If you react like this, everything will collapse." I read that line several times, then saved the email into a folder named Proof on my computer. To someone like me, those words were no different from a written confession. They had not only used my name for the party, but also for commercial loans. And now it was clear. Leaving me out of the party table was not just about image or emotions. It was a way to create distance, so that when things fell apart, I would no longer be there to ask why. One afternoon, my lawyer, Mr. Harris, came to my house. He placed a folder on the table. "Richard, I think we need to prepare for 2 paths. One is they stay quiet, never touch you again, to avoid exposing the loans. 2 is they hit back, blaming you for canceling the party, in which case we use this evidence." I nodded and opened the folder. Along with the printed email from Emily were the Fairmont, band, and vendor contracts, all proving my right to cancel. And most importantly, the loan contracts showed the signatures of Emily and David under the line guarantor. Richard Hale, an action I had never agreed to. "If they are smart, they will choose the first path," Harris said, like a quiet prediction. Even the extended family began to pull away. My sister, who used to be close to David, called to ask about it. But when I told her a few small pieces, she was silent for a long time. Finally, she said, "It will take a lot of time to mend things if there is still a wish to mend them." I knew that it was already enough to say it all. 2 weeks later, David tried once more, this time with a handwritten letter. His handwriting trembled slightly. I did not know if it was from emotion or anger. "Dad, we have gone too far. We will return the Fairmont deposit. But you also need to understand my business depends on relationships, and what you did has broken many of them." I folded the letter and did not answer, because I knew what I did had not broken anything. It had only pulled the curtain down so everyone could see what was behind the stage. And when the truth is exposed, whoever is affected is simply a natural consequence. By the end of the month, Harris told me the bank had contacted him to confirm my role in guaranteeing David's loans. When they received our written reply that I had never signed, The bank immediately demanded David provide another guarantor or settle early. For a young business like his, it was nothing less than a blow straight to the wallet. I felt neither joy nor pity. Everything was returning to its proper order. Whoever puts their name on it, they bear the responsibility. And I had simply taken that right back for myself. One early summer morning, I signed the final contract to sell the last shares I held in Hale Dining Group. It was not an impulsive decision, but the natural closing of a chapter. I had spent my youth building it, and now it was time to let it live on in the hands of younger people. I did not put the money in the bank just to watch the balance grow. I put most of it into a community project, a culinary vocational center for young people from difficult backgrounds. I wanted them to have the chance to stand behind a kitchen counter, hold a knife, hold a pan, and know that they could cook up their own life. On the opening day of the center, I stood in the wide kitchen, listening to the lively rhythm of knives chopping, the laughter mingling with the bubbling of boiling water. An 18-year-old boy with slightly messy hair ran up to ask me how to marinate fish to keep its sweetness. I showed him, slowly, just as I had once taught David when he was young. But this time I expected nothing in return, only that they would carry with them both skill and belief in themselves. I also spent more time for myself. In June, I drove along the coast of Maine, passing through small seaside towns, eating at nameless restaurants where a bowl of hot chowder could warm an entire chilly afternoon. In August, I took up oil painting at a community art class, starting with simple, still lifes and then landscapes. The hands that had once been used to holding kitchen knives now held brushes, and I found that each stroke was like a slower breath, a pause I had forgotten during the whirlwind years. In the evenings, I sat on the porch by the lake, a cup of hot tea on the table, the unfinished painting before me. The sunset dyed the water into a sheet of orange-red silk. I looked at the empty space on the canvas and suddenly remembered the empty chair at the Fairmont that day. The first time I saw it, I felt a coldness in my chest. Now that image had become a symbol, a reminder that sometimes losing your seat in a toxic family is not a loss, but a release. An empty chair can be the end of a sentence, or the opening of a door to a new life, depending on how you choose to take your next step. I no longer cared about what David and Emily thought or said. News about them still reached me from time to time. A project delayed, a charity party scaled down. But I felt no need to intervene. Their path was theirs. My path had turned in another direction, and I was content with it. Every morning I brewed a cup of coffee, opened the window to breathe in the lake breeze, then planned the things I wanted to do. An art class, a short trip, or simply a long lunch with an old friend. No more urgent calls from the restaurant, no more weighing every word at a family table. Just me and the peace I built for myself. Tonight, as I sit writing these lines, I want to leave you, the one reading this, with a question. Because my story may also be the story of someone out there. If one day you are deliberately cast aside by your own family, not because you have done wrong, but because your presence makes them uncomfortable, what will you do? Will you remain silent, hoping that one day they will change? Or will you choose the moment to stand up, not with a shout, but with an act strong enough to reclaim your voice and your worth? I chose the second, and from that empty chair, I found freedom. If this story touches you, leave your mark in the comments, share your thoughts, and subscribe to join me in more journeys about justice, truth, and the power of silence. Because sometimes silence is the loudest voice of all.